Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, August the 26th, 12:31 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. I thank you guys for showing up. And remember, if you are here with us, you have the opportunity of sharing topics of your interest or even questions for us to discuss live. I can typically discuss legal stuff more from a general perspective. I cannot do like a real consultation over a live stream because of naturally the regulations of the legal profession here in Brazil. But again, I'm gonna do my best to comment from a general perspective, the elements that could help you understand your journey. All right, so let's get started with our sponsor, which is Remax Nomad States. And they are based in Rio de Janeiro, but they work throughout the country. They've been providing a very good service to many of our clients. Some of the transactions I remember from the top of my head, naturally, Rio de Janeiro, Barra da Tijuca, Leblon, Ipanema, Copacabana, Santa Teresa, and also other capitals such as Florianópolis, São Paulo, of course. There was one recently in Fortaleza, just to mention a few of them. All right, they also work in Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte is a major capital in the state of Minas Gerais. And if you need their services, there you go. They are also offering insurance services. That's something many foreign citizens naturally need. Either health insurance, property insurance for the real estate that they're buying. They may need insurance like car insurance, among other things. So there you go. If you need any of those things, take a screenshot. You can contact them directly. And let's also take a look at the news. Let's see what's going on in Brazil. We see here some news about Meta in the United States, about a settlement of about $17 billion. I think it was a settlement, if I'm not mistaken. I also saw something on Apple News. I think it was a settlement between Meta and several individual states in the U.S. Regarding damage caused by social media to children and teens, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that's the headline over here. And naturally, there is also this type of discussion in Brazil. In Brazil, there is another topic that is probably a higher priority for us Brazilians, which is trying to find the balance between, like supervising, if you will, social media and freedom of speech. Because you're talking about freedom of speech, very interesting to compare Brazil to the United States. The United States has a much broader understanding of the freedom of speech. In Brazil, a lot of things that you could say are gonna be actually a criminal conduct, right? So in Brazil, freedom of speech is going to be substantially narrower in terms of liberties, right? For instance, if whatever you're saying, it could be interpreted as racism, this is going to be a criminal conduct, and this is going to be pursued very thoroughly by the Brazilian police, right? And so, many times you see like on the same front page of a newspaper, like different occasions in which people were robbed and killed, like in a robbery, armed robbery. And, you're going to see that there is not much being done by police to catch those killers. But on the same page, you're gonna see, someone who had like a discussion and called like someone else names that could refer back to racism, and this person was, like quickly found by the police and arrested, and they're gonna make sure, to take pictures of the person and advertise the arrest, right? So, of course, like racism is a pretty serious thing, but what concerns me is like the different priorities that we have in our society, right? Like, I think, racism should have the exact same level of attention we have in Brazil, but we shouldn't have, like more, let's say, a common conducts such as robbery, like the organized crime and all of those things becoming an accepted reality in Brazil. So that's what bothers me a lot, is like this kind of, thing we have in the Brazilian society, in which some of the things, they become like, fashionable for the police to, work on, and other things that are not fashion anymore, and they are going to become low priority. All right. So that's my take on the freedom of speech discussion. There is a lot of alignment, on these issues between different sides of the political aisle. I think just like in the United States, right? So that's something else for you to understand. There is also, this headline talking about flooding in Nepal and China border. Very unfortunate, 95 deaths. Let's see what else. We have the election. This one is talking about President Lula's son, who's involved like in different corruption scandals, and it's kind of becoming a thorn for President Lula's election effort. But yes, that's what we see here. There is also a poll in which President Lula would have like 46% of the votes, and Flávio Bolsonaro would have 41% of the votes in a second match, like in Brazil. Unless a candidate has a certain number of votes, the two most voted candidates, they are going to go to what we call segundo turno, or a second round, if you will. And this is what is being expected, right? Like for President Lula and Flávio Bolsonaro to go to a second round, right? Like before someone asks me, like I don't like any of those two candidates. I don't like Lula. I think Lula is going to be his fourth, right? Like his fourth mandate. That's just too much, right? Like, we need new faces. I don't like Flávio Bolsonaro as well. I just don't like him, right? Like, there are many tales of enrichment through like his position, and for being the son of President Bolsonaro. I don't like these two candidates at all, okay? And I wish we would have a different option for Brazil. Very sad that we don't have better candidates. But yes, it is what it is. Let's take a look at our chat and see if anyone is participating so far. And wow, I see Travel Jones. Travel Jones, I haven't been here in a while, but just know I'm still on track. I will be reaching out in the near future. Thank you for all you do. Good, sir. All right. Travel Jones just sent me a gift card for $50. That's gonna buy me lunch for a couple of days, Travel Jones. So generous of you, I really appreciate the words. And yes, we try to, share knowledge. We try to, make a difference in terms of our audience journeys, whether in Brazil, in Portugal, sometimes very interesting. We have journeys actually in the United States for some couples who started their journey in Brazil. Eventually, after several years, they may decide to also experience life together in the U.S. And then we also assist with this type of need as well. But very generous of you, Travel Jonas. Thank you so much. Your words really mean a lot to me. Okay. We have Eric. Is your firm able to get clients the Brazil retirement visa with just dividend and rental income with no formal pension for those who are still young? So Eric, dividend and rental income, like they are not really seen like by the Brazilian authority as traditional retirement. Brazil doesn't have a problem with age, okay? Let's start with that, because you're saying who are still young. So there is no cap, there is no need for the person to be retired in a sense that the person is not working anymore. And it would be really counterproductive for Brazil to have such a requirement. Brazil doesn't want to have, people who can no longer contribute to society in any manner. So Brazil has never set any type of requirements in terms of age. And typically, whenever we talk about the retirement track in Brazil, I like to mention that we have clients, in their 30s, and our record for, like the youngest, he was a gentleman from the military, a disabled veteran in his 20s. Okay, so in his 20s. So that's just to mention that there is absolutely no minimum wage. Now, this said, in terms of how Brazil is reviewing your income, Brazil is concerned about consistency. Brazil is not concerned about how much money people have. So very common pattern here at the office is like someone is going to say, well, I have $1 million in I don't know, in bonds. I have $1 million in my portfolio with Vanguard. And I have enough money for the Brazilian government to be assured I'm not going to become a burden to Brazil down the line, right? And that doesn't work. That's not how this track was structured. This track was structured for people with extremely solid, from the Brazilian perspective, right? That's not my opinion. Just like replicating the mindset. They want strings of income that are not prone to be discontinued in any manner, right? So if you think from this perspective, we're probably talking about what, like Social Security. We're talking about pensions, right, that are going to last forever. And we're going to be talking about disability. And these are, actually, when you read the Brazilian regulation for the retirement track, that's exactly what the regulation is going to say. The regulation is going to address those words that I'm mentioning, right? Like, Social Security, is going to mention pension. I don't recall about disability, but disability is interpreted by Brazil almost like a pension. And now these are going to be what we call the gold standard of the type of income you're going to be presenting. If you have, if you have a Social Security for $2,000, you gold. If you have $1 million in stocks, no good. And at least from the Brazilian immigration teams, like sitting in Brazil, meaning when you are applying physically in Brazil, your application is going to be reviewed in Brazil, not abroad. Those analysts, they are going to be very consistent. Like if you try to present something that is not solid, they don't care. Like if you say, well, I have $5,000, I have $10,000 of let's say, passive income that is not under those main categories, they are typically going to deny your application. Now, very interesting, whenever you are applying through a consulate, when you're applying through a consulate, decisions they are going to be more over the place. Okay, and what do I mean by that? I mean that when you are applying in Brazil, there is going to be more consistency in terms of the decisions you're going to see from the Brazilian immigration. Now, when you are applying abroad, there's going to be discretion, more discretion in terms of that particular consulate. And even within the consulate, you're going to have a different officer. So you're going to have someone who's going to know a lot about the retirement track, and they are going to actually apply the correct standards. And sometimes you're going to be, you're going to be dealing with an officer who doesn't know much about that particular track, and could, by mistake, get impressed by the $1 million portfolio. And even though it's not traditional retirement income, they could potentially accept. So, like more than once, like we saw cases in which someone was approved when they should not have been approved given the legal framework for this track. Now, something that is in the middle, right? Like it's not like passive income, like rental properties and dividends, but it's going to be in between. It's also not like the first tier of retirement flows. I would call like the 401ks, the IRAs, which are typical retirement vehicles in the United States, but they are not as solid as a Social Security, a pension, or a disability would be. And what do I mean by they are not as solid? I mean that many times you're going to choose the drawing sequence. Sometimes people say, listen, I'm going to plan my drawings, to kind of use up all my funds in the next 20 years. So meaning that they are not necessarily have an income after 20 years, even though they could, live for 30, 40 years. So this is going to be like the second tier in our understanding. And the second tier, as long as the immigration sees like a draw, that kind of satisfies the $2,000, and it shows like a probable sequence that would last, if not forever, but for a really long time. That's also typically accepted by the Brazilian immigration, right? Like whenever we're dealing with the second tier, we always highlight, listen, very probable that you're going to be approved, but not guaranteed. The standards that we see for Brazilian immigration, they change just like elsewhere, right? Just like in the United States, immigration standards, rules, and pathways, they change. Same thing for Portugal. Portugal had a bunch of changes recently and before. And the same thing for Brazil, right? So something that is always, interesting to me is like whenever a client is doing something and they ask me how this thing is going to work 5 years from now, right? And I say, listen, I cannot tell you how this thing is going to be working 1 year from now, what you say about 5 years from now. Now, what I do typically is like to explain how it works as of today and highlight, right, like hammer the fact that things could change. Another take on the time change and regulations. There is news of the Brazilian government discussing about increasing the minimum amount for the Brazil real estate investment visa. Nowadays is 1 million reais for the entire country, and they apply a 30% reduction percentage for the North and the Northeast. And that's how it works today. But there are conversations among the government, immigration, heads, like in terms of updating this amount. Like we did some calculation not long ago, and just based on inflation alone, this amount should be basically double of what it is today. So it's 1 million reais. This 1 million reais was set back in 2018. So we're talking about almost 10 years, and it hasn't been updated. It has been the same 1 million reais for this long time. So now we have some people saying, you know what, like, I mean, we should increase this amount. And so clients ask me, listen, if I buy a property today, can I apply 5 years from now? And then I need to tell them, listen, in terms of the amount, there is a very good chance that the amount is going to be different. And whenever you apply 5 years down the line, the Brazilian government is not going to, of course, like say, well, you know, like you bought back then, so yes, we're going to grant you the 1 million. No, they are going to use the current minimum amount. So that's the first take on the timeline. The second one is like, I don't know if, 5 years from now, we're going to have the real estate investor visa. Things change substantially, and they change everywhere. And a good example of a real estate investor visa, which was called golden visa, like in Portugal, and it was terminated. I think it was in 2023 or 2024, right? I think it was 2024, if I'm not mistaken. But nowadays, there's still the golden visa in Portugal, but you can no longer buy a property. You need to invest in certain funds and follow certain rules. But Portugal, was taking a look at the real estate investor visa and said, listen, this thing doesn't work well, because there was a high number of U.S. citizens going to Portugal and buying a bunch of properties. And guess what? The Portuguese people, they were like, suffering an impact on the price levels of real estate because of this large inflow of U.S. citizens. And therefore, Portugal terminated the real estate investor visa program. So the same thing could happen to Brazil. Like, I don't see the same problem happening with Brazil, because Brazil is huge, right? Like, I mean, there is no comparison between Brazil and Portugal from a size, from a GDP, from most of the perspectives. Like Portugal, it doesn't have the same meaning as Brazil, but is an example that, I don't know, maybe next year this thing is discontinued. And how can I tell, if you're going to be able to apply for the real estate investor visa 5 years from now? So there is that. Let's take a look at other entries. Cheering. Good day. I haven't been on the live in a while. Have a good day. Good to see you, Cheering. It has been a while. Thank you for showing up. We have a Z, Money Baller. How are traditional and Roth 401k IRA taxed when you become a Brazilian resident? Z, I am not sure. There are two possibilities, right? One, it's going to be, I don't recall if it is a fixed, like 15%, or if you would pay the 27.5%, which is like the maximum bracket. Okay, like Brazil has implemented, it was back in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, that the law was passed. And then they started to implement those changes last year. And I don't recall if they're using like, a reduced bracket for those things or not. Now, as far as I remember, for traditional retirement, meaning like Social Security, you would pay just a regular tax bracket in Brazil, meaning that for most people, because you're receiving in US dollars, you are, like converting to Brazilian currency, this is going to bump you up to the highest brackets. That could mean like 27.5%. But you're going to be able, let's say, if you pay anything federal in the US, like federal taxes, those federal taxes, they would be Typically, it depends on your case in particular. So don't don't take by the letter, but more as an approach that we see in Brazil. For federal taxes you pay in the U.S., typically they are going to be considered as a credit towards your tax liability in Brazil. In addition to that, like we have sometimes some type of exemption, like for the first, I don't know if it is like 2,000 reais, which is roughly, I don't know, $400. But in my experience, right, like whenever people think, well, I'm going to be taxed in Brazil, like, I mean, there is a real concern in terms of, well, I'm going to be paying double taxes. But whenever people do the actual study, and that's something we do as a service, not in a consultation, that's a service we provide, we can typically estimate how much is going to be your tax liability in Brazil, considering the different flows of income you may have, and helping you with the decision of whether or not to live in Brazil. And talking about taxes, this is one of the things that basically not killed, but reduced dramatically the inflow of U.S. citizens to Portugal. Until 2025, there was I think it was the end of 2024, there was an approach or a methodology by which the Portuguese government would give a preferred tax treatment to foreign citizens coming to live in Portugal, meaning if you have like someone coming from the U.S., they would have a very favorable tax treatment. And guess what? Portuguese citizens, they were complaining not only about U.S. citizens coming and buying all the properties, but also for having a lower tax bracket. And Portuguese citizens said, listen, what's going on, right? Like, I mean, we are in our country now, we have people coming from abroad and buying our properties, and on top of that, they don't pay the same level of taxes that we do. And guess what? So, because of this reaction by the Portuguese population, nowadays there is no more a preferred tax treatment for U.S. citizens, and the tax bracket in Portugal is not as nice as Brazil's brackets. Brazil highest tax bracket is going to be 27.5. Portugal, if I'm not mistaken, is either 45 or 47.5%. Okay, so substantially higher than what you would have in Brazil, substantially higher than what you would have in the United States as well. I don't think the Brazilian, taxation framework is bad at all. I think it's actually very favorable. Okay, like the numbers are super nice. Like particularly when you compare, like globally, Brazil is not bad in terms of the tax framework. What is bad, like that we Brazilians always complain, and you're probably gonna hear that a lot, is that we don't get what we would expect from our taxes paid, right? So we don't pay as much taxes as we could because the tax brackets, they are not like, high. But on the other side, like our feeling is that we don't have the reciprocity from the government, right? Like, I mean, there is a lot of waste in terms of public spending, and there is also a lot of corruption, right? Like, I mean, very difficult for anyone to deny that corruption is one of the systemic challenges of Brazil. And that's our complaint. So we don't, I typically don't complain that I pay a lot of taxes. I do complain that I would hope to get more out of those amounts that are being paid, particularly in terms of public safety in general. All right, Z, I hope that was helpful. Eric, thanks for the explanation. So, is it true that you have had the clients approve it with just passive income dividends by applying to the consulate for the retirement visa, provided that we prepared. Eric, we did have it, but we also had, clients who were denied, right? And so typically nowadays, we prefer not to work with those cases. Okay, I mean, it's just like a long shot. It's basically see if it flies, right? Like it's more a long shot than a typical pathway. Okay. What we do more often is like if you have a 401k or an IRA, we can discuss, right, like in a consultation, some strategies that we use to improve your chances of securing the retirement. All right, Eric, I hope that was helpful. And listen, if you're here with us, don't forget, you can like our live stream if you like our live stream, and you can also follow us for more content. We've been releasing some videos, some nice videos about São Paulo, about neighborhoods, about updates to the digital nomad and other specific aspects of the immigration journey to Brazil. And just because I mentioned that, something very interesting that I saw this week, maybe a couple of things, right? The first one is that the São Paulo Federal Police, as usual, is overwhelmed. And even people working in the immigration space, they are unable to secure an appointment for registration at the Brazilian Federal Police in São Paulo, right? São Paulo is basically the busiest federal police station for immigration in Brazil, and the city just gets bigger, and there are more foreign citizens coming to São Paulo. So this has been an ongoing situation. Same thing for Santa Catarina. Santa Catarina is also like very overwhelmed by the application. So this is another nuance, right? Like whenever people are particularly clients from the United States, and don't hear that as criticism. Is just like my experience. I mean, no judgment there, but they kind of feel they are going through a more like rubber stamping process, and that's not it. Like, I mean, there is a real immigration selection, review, routing of your application, and many people would expect that things would work like as a clockwork, right? Like precisely within a certain timeline, and that's not how things work. That's not how things work in the U.S. That's not how things work in Portugal, and that's not how things work in Brazil. There is a lot of like things that could happen in the meantime. Sometimes there are no appointments available. Sometimes you get an officer who's going to be pickier than someone else. Many times, like there is going to be some inconsistency in terms of your names, like how you've been presenting. Your passport is going to present your name in a way. Your birth certificate says something else. Your background check, a third variety, right? And all of those things is impossible for anyone, either here at the firm or elsewhere, to be able to straight those things out from the get-go and guarantee that no bumps on the road are going to occur. Okay. So, and that's more like a mindset, right? Like we have clients, and listen, I love our U.S. clients. That's our main clientele, as you can easily tell. But many clients, they come like, like they are entitled to a visa or residency in Brazil. Say, well, I'm taking my U.S. dollars. Like, I mean, you better, handle this fast, and they feel like it's just like rubber stamp, and it is not. And not surprisingly, some of the clients with this attitude, they are gonna typically have a really hard time at the Brazilian Federal Police. They can read that, right? Like they can read. Whenever someone comes like with this feeling of entitlement, they are gonna hammer this person. They are gonna make their lives miserable, and you know, nothing better than being like humble and respectable because you're going to someone else's country, and that is only gonna help in your journey. But yeah, so that's the first piece of news. You know, São Paulo Federal Police is even busier than usual. The second one is that attorneys and law firms in Rio de Janeiro, they are being chased by the Brazilian Federal Police for fraud, for fraudulent applications for residency based on the União Estável, stable union, which in the US is typically known as civil union. So a lot of people, you know, because a civil union is somewhat easy to do in Brazil, they are, you know, basically saying, you know what, like you're my friend, let's pretend we have a relationship, we just do that, and guess what? This is gonna come back to bite you in the neck, okay? And we have zero concerns, right? We do everything by the books. We don't do shortcuts here at the firm, and we have zero concerns. But many attorneys, they are being chased by the Brazilian Federal Police for fraudulent applications. And yes, if the attorney, even if the attorney is not suggesting like the fraud, if they are aware of the fraud and they participate in the application, that could be, that could be enough for a criminal procedure, because, you know, just like in the United States, attorneys, they are not supposed to help people like break the law, and you know, this has been very common in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, Rio de Janeiro, a wonderful place. That's where we have our largest office in Brazil. That's where we have probably most of our real estate transactions. But like we have some challenges in terms of people following the law, and I always share, right, just so it doesn't sound like a personal opinion. If you take a look at the last 10 governors for Rio de Janeiro state, like 6 of them, they went to jail for corruption. And yes, I mean, there is an upside in this situation. You know, at least people are going to jail. But I do think it's not just because the police is being diligent in terms of arresting those folks. I think there is also, I mean, something cultural in Rio de Janeiro that kind of, allows those things to happen, right? And that's very unfortunate. We, don't deviate from the correct pathway, right? Like, I mean, and yes, but that's what's happening. That's what's going on. And just as a technical outcome of those frauds related to União Estável, the civil union, guess what? Whenever now you are trying to apply truth their route, the Brazilian Federal Police, they are going to be very cautious. They are going to be very picky about everything in your application. And they are typically always going, like for União Estável, they are always going to address informed. They want to see that the couple is living together, that they are sharing a life, right? And sometimes we have some funny either, consultations or even questions here at the live stream. Well, if we, for professional reasons, we are living apart, right? I mean, guess what? I mean, this is not going to work at all, because, again, the Brazilian Federal Police, they are really on top of those types of application. Okay, we have Jonathan. Boa tarde, Luciano. Boa tarde, Jonathan. It's been a while. Good to see you over here. Z, think the Brazilian taxes on these traditional and Roth IRAs for 1K seems to be not well understood or described online. I think it could be a very popular video if you dig deep in the subject. That's a great idea, Z. That's a great idea. Maybe have a video, right, like addressing some of the. I'm gonna even take notes, Z. Thank you for suggestion. All right, so typical U.S. retirement tools, how they are taxed in Brazil, potential credits, offsets, and our opinion on whether or not this should be a deal breaker. Nice. All right, Z, you very good idea. Jonathan, Luciano, how has the prenuptial agreements lessened in power Brazil? Luciano, how has the prenuptial agreements lessened in power Brazil as in the past? Right. So I think Jonathan is addressing here, like how protective a prenuptial agreement would be, and in Brazil in general, and that's not just like about prenuptial agreement, but this is going to be a reality throughout the field of family law. There is this kind of a cultural or cultural/legal background or context in which a judge is always going to be on the lookout for a balance, right? No matter what, like the decisions, the paperwork, or the documents that you present in a particular case. And therefore, even if you have like a very good prenuptial agreement drafted, depending on the circumstances, a judge could basically set aside the provisions of that prenuptial agreement and just decide something else. And, just like an example, let's say if you and your, fiancé in Brazil, you're both professionals, you're both breadwinners, and then you have a prenuptial saying, listen, there is not going to be support ever, because guess what? Nobody needs support here. You guys sign that prenuptial agreement, makes sense, and is in the shelf, and let's say during the course of your marriage, one spouse becomes disabled, and then the other spouse, the enabled one, file for divorce. This is a situation in which typically the judge is gonna award a pension, or is gonna grant, or is gonna award spousal support for life against the abled spouse, right? So you see how serious this is. You have a prenuptial agreement, it's well balanced. It says nobody's gonna ever have support, but if there is this type of extreme situation, I guarantee a judge will very easily award support for life for the disabled spouse, and that's just like this concept of fairness, and that in the judge's head should overcome whatever was written in the prenuptial agreement, right? Now, the prenuptial agreement is not just like ignored, right? That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that in Brazil, a prenuptial agreement is going to hold less water than it would elsewhere. Okay, I think that's the bottom line. Let me tell you two upsides or real upsides of a prenuptial agreement in Brazil, just so I don't give this impression that this thing is useless, which is not what I'm saying. So two things, right? The first one, if you kind of explain the reasoning behind the relationship, this thing is gonna, kind of encapsulate this agreement between the couple, and down the line, through a divorce, it's kind of gonna look bad on the spouse asking for support, because guess what? This person said, "Yes, I agree, I understand, right? Like the stepstones for this relationship." So I think this would be better than nothing, because again, it shows an intention of the two parties, right? So that's the first upside, to kind of like write down the assumptions for that particular relationship. And yes, like you're gonna be able to argue, and like some judges are gonna give weight to what's in the prenuptial agreement, right? So that was the first real advantage. The second one is gonna be for something that unless you have a prenuptial agreement, you're gonna be basically uh, having as a default, right? Like in Brazil, it does not matter, like if you are, marrying under an asset regime that is like that you're gonna kind of have like the community property for the income that you bring in, or if you're picking a separate or a different asset regime that says that there is going to be a total separation. It does not matter unless you have a prenuptial agreement saying that the income arising from personal property is going to remain separate. Guess what? Typically, courts are going to decide that the income arising from the personal property from before the marriage is going to be community property, okay? But at least until recently, right? Like I never know when things are changing here. But until recently, as long as you would have a prenuptial agreement saying that, income arising from personal property, meaning separate property, is going to remain separate, you would have this thing becoming common. So trying to, simplify here, you do the prenuptial agreement, you keep the income arising from your personal property also personal, instead of becoming an income for the couple. All right, I hope that makes sense. So these are, like two very kind of consistent and solid upsides of the prenuptial agreement. And like the bottom line here is that, prenuptial agreements in Brazil don't hold as much water as they would in the US. All right, Jonathan, thank you for the interesting question. We have a Timothy. Can a non-resident Brazilian citizen buy rural land? Timothy, typically not, right? Like, I mean, and let's say from the law, you need to be a resident in Brazil to be able to buy rural property, okay? And maybe even a step before that, foreign citizens, whenever they are buying rural properties, they are going to face restrictions that are not typical to Brazilians. And for urban properties, on the other hand, there are typical no restrictions to foreign citizens. So you want to buy, I don't know, like 100 apartments in São Paulo, no problem. You can buy 100 apartments. You can buy, you want to buy a beachfront apartment in Leblon, which would sell typically for, I don't know, $10 million, okay? Not 10 million reais, $10 million. You can buy, no problem, okay? Now, if you're dealing with rural property, it changes dramatically. Now you're going to have restrictions on size. You're going to have restrictions on nationalities that are buying too much in a single municipality. And yes, like when you read the law, when you go by the law, there is a restriction saying that only residents in the country should be allowed to buy rural properties, right? So if you are a foreign citizen and you don't have any residencies, in theory, you shouldn't be able to buy. Now, I remember more than one transaction in which a foreign citizen was allowed to buy even though they were not residents, right? Like one of the reasonings is like, well, if the person is married to a Brazilian, right? Like, and then the cartório is going to consider that the buyer is the Brazilian. They turn a blind eye on the foreign citizen, because my interpretation is that even for a foreign citizen married to a Brazilian, you still need to satisfy like the residency requirement, okay? And then an even deeper discussion on that, it goes typically on what type of residency would qualify. And then there are different decisions, right? Like there are different interpretations. Some cartórios, they're going to look at the digital nomad, they're going to give you a thumbs up. Other cartórios, they're going to give you a thumb down, okay? So it's a very specific type of situation. If you hire us to handle your transaction, we're typically not going to let you get into trouble when buying rural properties. Now, if you buy by yourself, you are exposed to very serious situations whenever you're dealing with, rural properties in Brazil. We also don't like, transactions in which people are using a front person. I don't know, I think people should know by now that we are not the right match for this type of need. And they do come every now and then, right? Like, I guess some people would assume lawyers, they are up for anything as long as you're paying them, right? And that's not how we work here at the firm. So, there was a lady a long time ago. She said, well, I'm going to buy on my friend's name and everything is decided. I just need you to vet, to make sure the document is good. I said, no, we don't work like that. And she was enraged, right? Because we didn't want to work in a transaction in which she was using someone else. And, the reasoning here is not just like because she was basically, right, like circumventing public policy, but it also comes from our concern that, guess what? I mean, those things, they're very short-sighted, right? Like, I mean, you have a friend, you're buying this property on your friend's name, you have a separate, like a hidden contract, and you think that this person, like 5 years or 10 years down the line, they are going to still give you this property back, or they are not going to dishonor, like, the private contract between you. I mean, it's just so obvious to us that this thing could not result in anything good, right? So it's not just a matter of trying to avoid cases that are not really, good for the company or for the law for Brazil, but it's also about avoiding stuff that is going to clearly become a problem for whoever is doing that. Okay, Timothy. So, all right. So, yeah, feel free to ask follow-up questions. That's an interesting subject. It doesn't have always like the same answer. It depends on the state. It depends on the city. It depends on the registry. It depends on the specifics. But there you go. Now you have some elements to understand the complexity of buying rural properties in Brazil. Z with more ideas, another video on how the U.S. taxes Brazilian Tesouro Direto after you open a CNR would also be likely to get attention since this information is not available online. You're right, Z. I'm going to take note of this one as well. And you're right. For this one, if I'm not mistaken, that's straight 15%, right? Because whenever someone is not a resident in Brazil, Brazil is going to charge the taxes, we call it na fonte. It's going to be the concept of withholding, right? Like in the US, you call it withholding, meaning that, there is the income and you don't even get the income to then pay the tax. It means the taxes are segregated from the get-go. In Brazil, it goes even further because the withholding, it could be adjusted down the line in the US, and in Brazil, it's a straight bracket. Again, I think it's 15% for Tesouro, meaning that if you're getting like compensation, if you're drawing, you would have to pay on the spot. Now, I don't know if Tesouro Direto, should be available to non-residents, because to non-residents, there is this concept that people shouldn't have access to all the opportunities available to residents. Okay, so for instance, if you have a non-resident bank account with Rendimento, right? Like, I mean, everybody knows Rendimento. With BTG, Rendimento offers, for instance, the CDB application, but as far as I remember, that's the only one they offer. Okay, so very careful, like in terms of the things that you're dealing, because some things they are actually not supposed to be available to non-residents. Okay, non-residents is a very specific situation. If you are non-resident, you should not have access to the same things a resident would. But yes, I mean, just what I just said, plus your question about the tax brackets, I agree. I think that would be a really nice video. Matt, boa tarde, Dr. Oliveira. Boa tarde, Matt. Adrian and I appreciate you, and I appreciate you, Matt and Adrian. So good to hear from you both. We are moving along again on my retirement visa. That's great news. That's great news, Matt. And just talking in general, right? Just talking in general, we discussed like about, like the retirement track with some of our friends in the industry, right? And they were highlighting, right, like how different consulates could be in terms of the processing. Okay, so just to throw this nuance, if you're applying physically in Brazil, very consistent. Like we are able to kind of forecast, not always, like most of the time forecast how they are going to apply the requirements. But just like I was mentioning at the beginning of this live, Matt and Adrian, I don't know if you were here, I was explaining how different consulates could be. And, during this discussion of ours with our colleagues in the industry, they were highlighting, like consulates, they're all over the place. Like they create their kind of mindsets about how the consulate should deal with applicants. And they don't kind of how can I say, they don't adjust their mindset depending on other consulates, right? So my take on it, like I don't work at a consulate, but we do interact with many. There is probably like a mandate from the federal government, and they send some type of there is of course the regulation. There may be some type of few pages guideline on how to process the visa applications, and from there each consulate is going to create its own routine on how to handle the applications, right? And therefore they could be very different in terms of how to process. And a challenge for like applicants is that you cannot do a forum shopping, right, or a consulate shopping. You cannot pick the one you're gonna use. Typically, you're gonna use your driver license to pinpoint your consulate. But some consulates, they are also gonna ask a proof of address, so they even push you one degree further in order to make sure that yes, you are entitled to use that particular consulate for your application. So let's say if you are by chance stuck with a difficult consulate, yes, I mean there is not really much that can be done. But that's just more information, Matt, on the reality of the retirement track that I've been sharing from the beginning of this live stream. Z, in the case of Tesouro Direto Fundos, Selic, IPCA, and CNR, the Brazilian tax seems to be relatively straightforward. It is the US that complicates things. Yeah, Z, that's another interesting point. So there is complexity, right? Like Brazil creates complexity, or it changes the rules. Like when you are a non-resident in Brazil, And you also have like the US side, right? Like, I mean, I typically tell my clients, make sure you're following both countries, the regulations of both countries. But, be more concerned about the US side, because in Brazil, typically the penalties are going to be financial. They could be heavy, all right? Like, don't read me wrong here. Like, the financial penalties in Brazil, they may be very heavy. But I don't have notice of anyone going to jail. Okay, now we have a client here in the firm who went like to prison for not declaring income from abroad. Okay, so this guy, he went to prison. It was, a meaningful term. It was a meaningful, time he did in prison for simply not reporting foreign income to Uncle Sam, right? So the U.S. is a matter of, being free or not. That's something I always hammer whenever I'm discussing with our clients in terms of following, the rules. And of course, like, I mean, you don't want to be hit with penalties. My philosophy, my personal take on it is like, whenever you go to bed at the end of the day, you don't want to, be thinking about what could happen if someone finds out something that you're doing illegally, right? Like, I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep well, right? So I like to do things by the books. Sometimes, yes, you pay more taxes than you would. Sometimes you make less money than you would. But, I think, a peaceful sleep is worth much more than like making some extra money at the end of the day. All right, Z, thanks for the great content, Luciano. It's very much appreciated. Thank you for the nice participation, Z. Timothy, thank you. Thank you, guys. And yes, it looks like you are connected to our timeline here for the live stream. We are arriving at the end of the live stream. Remember, we're going to have another live stream next week. And I honestly hope to have you with us. And next one is going to be on the 2nd. It's going to be September the 2nd. And it's going to be at the same time, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. If you have some ideas, if you have some, questions occurring during the week, you know what? Just take note so you can share next week here with us. And I'm going to be very happy to comment on them. Again, thank you for participating. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for subscribing. And wishing you all a blessed